Are you set to go? All good. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here at Police Headquarters. I'm joined this morning by Superintendent Leverington, who is available to speak after I have, to give a bit more detail around the announcement that I'm making today and answer any of the technical questions that you might have. But I'm here to announce that today I'll be introducing into the Parliament a bill to outlaw the possession, production and dissemination of blueprints for the printing of 3D guns. We know, and the Superintendent will go into a bit more detail here, we've seen an increase in issues around 3D printed firearms. There is increasing demand for those from criminals or would-be criminals and those seeking to get access to them on the black market. It's important that we update our legislation as quickly as we are able to give protection to the South Australian public, but also to our serving police officers as well, who of course are at risk if there is the dissemination of these 3D printed firearms. This legislation, this bill will come with really tough penalties as well, a maximum of 15 years in jail and up to a $75,000 fine. So we are making sure that strong action is taken if people are found to have produced these blueprints, which can be disseminated online, and if someone gets a hold of them, they have essentially everything they need to put that information into a 3D printer and produce an illicit or an illegal firearm. So tough penalties here. We will be only the third jurisdiction in Australia to introduce this legislation. New South Wales and Tasmania have also done so. South Australia will be the third jurisdiction to do that. I think one of the great challenges in law enforcement is technology. We see it in all sorts of areas around drones, around 3D printed firearms, where technology has made huge advancements, and police are doing their really important work every day to try to keep the community safe, often under difficult circumstances where technology presents new challenges for them and new challenges for the community. My job as the Police Minister, the government's job as legislators, is to make sure we give that legislative framework, those laws in place to give police the powers to stamp that out, so that if someone is found to have made a blueprint that can be used in a 3D printer to produce a gun, or in possession of one, or disseminated it, including in the online environment, there is a legal framework in place for them to be arrested and face really stiff penalties, as I said, of up to 15 years jail time or a fine of $75,000. I'll pass over to the Superintendent Leverington now to give a bit more detail around this. Then I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on today's announcement or any other questions you might have about any other matters. Superintendent Leverington.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning. SAPOL, and particularly Firearms Branch, welcomes the new legislation to regulate the possession and use of 3D blueprints in the manufacture of 3D printed firearms. Illicit 3D firearms are a fast evolving challenge for police. Digital blueprints are easily accessible on the internet. The components can look like toys, but they certainly aren't toys. It's important to recognise that once assembled, they become illicit firearms and can be untraceable. In terms of the size of the problem, in 2024 there were 6 incidents where we found 3D blueprints with 3D printed firearms, and at that point, obviously, those blueprints we didn't take any action on. In 2025 so far, we've had 14 incidents, so more than double, where we've seen the same circumstances. Since May 2020, when we've been keeping records in relation to blueprints, there have been 42 incidences where we've had 3D blueprints present at an address with 3D printed firearms. Once this legislation is enacted, members of the public will need to be licensed to possess firearms parts or sound moderators in terms of the blueprints. Public safety sits at the core of everything we do in SAPOL. The changes will enable early intervention against people with no lawful business in firearm manufacturing, and it will strengthen our capability in terms of making sure we're keeping these illicit firearms out of the hands of individuals that shouldn't have them. Happy to take questions.
Superintendent, just what you said just then about the new licence to have sound moderators and parts, in what realm would they need those things legitimately?
So if they had a category of firearm and they wanted to print a part for that particular firearm that they were licensed for, then they could print that.
So there are legitimate areas where you are able to print gun parts?
Absolutely.
And are they collectors? What do they do?
No, normal licensee. So if you're a licensee with a firearm, a specific category, then you can print a part for that firearm.
What's the process going to look like for them to get? Is that a pretty strict process to get that license?
No, so that licence will be covered by their normal firearms licence that they have.
Are you seeing an increase in these sort of guns being used or involved in crime?
So we're certainly seeing more in terms of this year, having 14 incidents where we're seizing 3D printed firearms, and we've certainly brought some along today to show the calibre and the type of firearms that we're pulling out of the community. So yes, to have 14 incidents in 2025 alone, I would say that's a significant amount.
Can you give an example of what those incidents were?
Not specifically.
Given these blueprints, it's not illegal to create them since you can legitimately use them. Does that mean that, I guess, because they can be so easily disseminated, it's around the possession that's the problem? So does that provide a really big challenge for them just being like around, and it's about not being able to have it in your possession?
Absolutely. This is about firearms and making sure that the community is safe, making sure that the people that shouldn't be manufacturing firearms don't have blueprints to do so. So I think in terms of the challenge that we have, if we're going into an address, we would want to make sure that that licensee has a blueprint for the firearm that they're lawfully enabled to have. And if we're going into a house where there is no licensee and there is no lawful reason to have it, that we're taking this action, and we've certainly got as the Minister said, really good penalties now in terms of those possessions.
Do you think there needs to be more regulation about where people can access blueprints online? Like maybe, is that even possible?
Look, that's a challenge. Of course, we can't regulate the possession of a 3D printer, the internet in what it is in terms of all of the things that sit on there. That's not necessarily for police to manage. What we want to do is make sure that when we go through into those addresses, if we are finding illicit manufacturing, that we've now got the powers to take action.
The actual material that's being used, is this your standard run-of-the-mill 3D printing material, or do you need a higher grade to be able to print these things?
So I'm not an expert in 3D printing, certainly, but my understanding and certainly what we're seeing is these are just printers that people can legally purchase, and that's what, unfortunately, in certain cases, that's what we're seeing them make.
I guess my question would be, are we only able to go after blueprints, or are we also looking at the materials that are being used to make these as well, that can kind of tip off what they're being used for?
Certainly we have lots of investigative methods in terms of how we understand who's doing what in the community. However, this part of it is certainly just for the blueprints.
Shall we ask some questions?
No worries, Hannah. Can I add one little thing, and then I'll take whatever questions you want, just perhaps to Sophie, to your question too. And this is around sending a message in terms of those out there who currently think that they can get away with having one of these blueprints in their possession, or creating one of these blueprints, or sending one of these blueprints to somebody else. This is about a message that if you get caught doing this by SAPOL, you face potential 15 years in jail and a $75,000 fine. So I think currently, given we don't have those laws there is no doubt out there in cyberspace, where people are doing all sorts of crazy things every single day, the kind of view that they can do this with impunity and without any action being taken. It's about sending a message too, that if you play in this area where you aren't a licensed firearm owner and you are potentially creating one of these 3D guns, or giving someone else the ability to create an illegal 3D gun, that you are going to face potential jail time. That's why this is so important, and I am pleased that we'll be only the third jurisdiction to get this in place, because as you heard from the Superintendent, that increase in the number of cases where these are being found is of course a real worry. And I can say in answer to your question, the advice that I have had is that, as the Superintendent said, basically your regular 3D printer, which is available in lots of different places, is capable of producing some of these things. So the action we need to take is against those who create the blueprints that can be fed into the machine to print one of these guns. That's where we can best target our efforts, and that's what we're doing here.
And just before we do move on, so you said you've done a bit of consultation around to make sure this is loophole free. How long has it taken to put together this legislation?
How long our consultation was?
Was it a month?
Yes. So 6 weeks or a month consultation, which is probably pretty standard, but it is a complex area. As I said before, one of the great challenges for us in law enforcement is new technologies that come, like 3D guns, like drones, and police and SAPOL are responsible for responding out in the real world when those things are used. So it's important that when we introduce legislation like this, which I will today, that we've got it right and we've done the hard work around consultation and stakeholder views. You know, you'll hear from the opposition very regularly. We heard from them this morning, making all these things sound really, really simple. The truth is often they're not. My focus as the police minister is when we go into Parliament and put down a bit of legislation that we want to become law, we've done our homework and we make sure that it works when it's passed, which hopefully it will be swiftly, and it's what SAPOL need to actually enforce. So if someone is found to have breached this and it goes to the courts, you know, it has the backing there to make sure that person actually faces the penalty they deserve to face. Hannah, sorry.
Yeah, so